They laughed at him. The quiet janitor with the worn uniform and gentle eyes, mopping floors in the sterile corridors of Metropolitan Hospital, invisible to the doctors who rushed past him, dismissed by nurses who barely noticed his presence. Mocked by the arrogant chief surgeon who saw him as nothing more than a shadow among the gleaming medical equipment. Marcus Webb never responded to their cruelty, never defended himself, never revealed the truth hidden beneath his humble exterior. But when a catastrophic accident sent dozens of broken bodies flooding through those emergency room doors, when chaos erupted and patients began dying because there were not enough hands to save them, the janitor they had scorned stepped forward and shattered every assumption they had ever made about him, performing miracles with a scalpel and exposing a secret that transformed their mockery into stunned reverence. Marcus Webb pushed his mop across the polished floors of Metropolitan Hospital with the same quiet precision he had maintained for 7 years, his 53-year-old frame moving through the bustling corridors like a ghost among the living. Unnoticed by the doctors in their pristine white coats, ignored by the nurses hurrying between patient rooms, invisible to everyone who passed him as though he were merely another piece of hospital equipment. His uniform was faded from countless washings, the blue fabric worn thin at the elbows, his name tag slightly crooked, but his movements held a careful dignity that no one bothered to observe. He cleaned each room with meticulous attention, his hands steady as he wiped down surfaces, his eyes catching details that others missed. The way a medication cart had been left unlocked, the manner in which a patient's IV drip was running too slowly. Small things that mattered in ways the rushing staff never considered. Dr. Richard Hastings strode through the emergency department like a king surveying his domain, his expensive shoes clicking against the floors Marcus had just cleaned, his sharp features arranged in an expression of permanent superiority, barking orders at residents who scrambled to please him, dismissing nurses with curt gestures when their questions annoyed him. Nurse Sarah Chen moved through the chaos with exhausted grace, her kind eyes ringed with dark circles from double shifts, still managing gentle words for frightened patients even as the weight of too many responsibilities pressed down on her shoulders. Dr. Jennifer Brooks, ambitious and razor-sharp at 29, followed Hastings like a shadow, absorbing his techniques, mimicking his arrogance, desperate to prove herself worthy of his mentorship and the prestige that came with it. Marcus watched them all, understanding the dynamics, seeing the way medicine had become about hierarchy rather than healing. But he said nothing, just continued his work, present but unseen. That afternoon, as he knelt to clean a spill near the nurse's station, Dr. Hastings emerged from an examination room surrounded by a group of medical students, his voice loud and authoritative as he explained a complex diagnosis. And Marcus's mop bucket sat directly in his path. Hastings stopped, his face darkening with irritation, and his voice cut through the corridor like a blade. "Must you be underfoot constantly? This is a hospital, not a janitorial convention. Move that bucket before someone important trips over your incompetence." The medical students laughed. Brooks smirked, and Marcus stood slowly, his weathered hands gripping the mop handle, his expression unchanged as he quietly wheeled his bucket aside, absorbing the humiliation without a word, his dignity intact even as their mockery echoed through the hall. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Thank you. Marcus woke each morning at 5:30 in his small apartment on the east side of the city. The paint peeling from walls that had once been white, the single window overlooking a brick wall that blocked most of the sunlight, his furniture sparse and functional, everything in his life reduced to what was absolutely necessary. He made instant coffee in a chipped mug, heated oatmeal in a microwave that hummed with mechanical distress, ate standing at the narrow counter, because sitting at the small table felt too much like admitting his solitude. On the shelf above the sink sat 3 photograph frames, all facing downward against the wood, their backs covered in dust because he never turned them over, never allowed himself to see the faces captured in those frozen moments of a life that no longer existed. His hands trembled slightly as he washed his breakfast dishes, a tremor he had learned to hide during working hours, a reminder of things he had lost and could never reclaim. The bus ride to Metropolitan Hospital took 40 minutes through morning traffic, and Marcus sat in the back corner, watching the other passengers with quiet compassion. The young mother struggling with a crying infant and too many bags, the elderly man whose hands shook as he counted change, the teenager whose eyes held the kind of worry that came from shouldering adult problems too soon. He saw their humanity, their struggles, recognized in each of them the dignity that came simply from continuing forward despite everything. Arriving at the hospital, Marcus entered through the service entrance, changed into his uniform in the basement locker room, and began his rounds on the second floor, deliberately avoiding the surgical wing on the fourth floor where the operating rooms hummed with activity and purpose. Once, pushing his cart past a supply room, he glimpsed a surgical tray being prepared, the instruments gleaming under fluorescent lights, scalpels and clamps, and retractors arranged with precision, and his hands began shaking so violently that he had to grip the cart handle to steady himself, his breath coming fast and shallow until he forced himself to look away, to move forward, to forget. His cleaning of the emergency room was different from how other janitors worked. His hands moving over medical equipment with unusual gentleness, touching monitors and IV poles with the careful respect of someone who understood their purpose, who knew these machines sustained life, who treated them as sacred instruments rather than mere objects. Sarah found him wiping down a defibrillator with meticulous care, and she smiled, that rare, genuine smile that acknowledged him as a person rather than a function. "You take such good care of everything, Marcus," she said softly, her voice carrying kindness he rarely heard. "Someone has to," he replied quietly, and for just a moment their eyes met. Two people who understood what it meant to serve while being invisible. She returned to her patients, and Marcus continued his work, alone again, surrounded by people yet profoundly isolated, carrying secrets that weighed heavier than any bucket of water he pushed across those endless floors. The hospital hierarchy revealed itself in 1,000 small cruelties. The way doctors walked past nurses without acknowledging their expertise, the manner in which residents competed viciously for Hastings's approval, the casual dismissal of anyone whose salary fell below a certain threshold. And Marcus existed at the very bottom of this carefully constructed pyramid of worth. That Tuesday afternoon, Dr. Hastings gathered 6 medical students in the hallway outside the intensive care unit, his voice carrying that particular tone of academic superiority as he quizzed them on post-operative complications. And Marcus was cleaning nearby, and his presence so thoroughly ignored that he might as well have been invisible. A student answered incorrectly, and Hastings's contempt was immediate and cutting. "That's the kind of thinking that belongs in janitorial work, not medicine," he said, gesturing carelessly toward Marcus without even looking at him. "Perhaps you should trade places with our friend here, since apparently you have similar intellectual capacities." The students laughed dutifully, their nervousness transforming into relief that they were not the target, and one whispered just loud enough to be heard, "At least janitors can't kill anyone with their stupidity." More laughter followed, sharp and cruel, and Dr. Brooks added with a smirk, "Though he might bore someone to death with his moping around." Marcus continued wiping the wall, his movements unchanged, his face expressionless, and his dignity a shield they could not penetrate, no matter how hard they tried. But something deep inside him folded inward like paper being creased, each word leaving marks they would never see. When they finally dispersed, he pushed his cart to the supply closet on the 3rd floor, closed the door behind him, and stood among the cleaning solutions and stacked linens, allowing himself 60 seconds of pain, his forehead resting against the cool metal shelving, his breath shaky, his eyes closed against memories of a time when he had commanded respect instead of contempt. A small voice outside the door interrupted his moment. "Mr. Marcus? Are you in there?" 7-year-old Emma Patterson, recovering from an appendectomy, peered through the doorway with curious brown eyes and a smile that held no judgment whatsoever. Marcus straightened immediately, wiping his face, and smiled back. "Hello, Emma. Shouldn't you be resting?" She shrugged, her hospital gown decorated with cheerful cartoon bears. "Resting is boring. Will you tell me another story about the birds you see on the bus?" Marcus knelt beside her, and for the next 20 minutes He described the cardinal he had seen that morning, the way its red feathers caught the sunrise, making it look like a tiny flame against the gray city morning. And Emma listened with complete attention, seeing in Marcus what the doctors could not. A person worthy of her time, her trust, her friendship, someone who treated her not as a patient or a case number, but as a human being who mattered. Eleanor Hastings arrived at Metropolitan Hospital on Thursday morning in a chauffeur-driven Mercedes, her silver hair styled in a perfect chignon, her designer suit worth more than Marcus earned in 3 months, her expression carved from the same cold marble that graced the hospital's donor wall bearing her late husband's name. She swept through the main entrance with the hospital administrator, Gerald Patterson, scurrying beside her like an anxious sparrow, his cheap suit wrinkled, his forehead gleaming with nervous perspiration, his entire focus on pleasing the woman whose donations kept the hospital financially afloat, even as its patient care deteriorated. Marcus was mopping the main corridor when she passed, his cart positioned carefully against the wall to avoid blocking traffic. But Eleanor walked by without the slightest acknowledgement of his existence, her eyes moving over him as though he were part of the architecture, something built into the structure rather than a living human being working to maintain it. Her son Richard joined them near the elevator, his posture straightening in her presence, seeking approval he never seemed to fully receive, and together they discussed budget cuts and efficiency metrics while standing 3 feet from where Marcus cleaned, speaking freely because they assumed his ears were as irrelevant as his presence. Sarah passed with a medication cart, and Eleanor stopped her with an imperious gesture. "Nurse, why are patient wait times in emergency increasing?" Sarah hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "We're understaffed, Mrs. Hastings. We lost 2 nurses last month and haven't replaced them. Everyone's working double shifts, and we're doing our best." "But people are exhausted." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "Excuses don't improve metrics." Sarah glanced at Marcus, then back at Eleanor. "Neither does ignoring the people who keep this hospital running, all of them, at every level." The subtle emphasis was not lost on Eleanor, whose expression hardened with disapproval. "Your opinion on hospital operations has been noted, Nurse Chen." Patterson jumped in nervously, steering Eleanor away while babbling about cost-saving measures and revenue streams, his vocabulary stripped of any reference to actual human suffering, reducing medicine to spreadsheets and profit margins. The television in the waiting area played the midday news, and the anchor's voice drifted through the corridor as they departed. Transportation officials continue to express concern about the intersection of Highway 41 and Riverside Drive, where 17 accidents have occurred this year alone, making it the most dangerous crossing in the metropolitan area. City Council debates safety improvements as frustrated drivers continue to risk the poorly designed merge lanes. Marcus paused, mop in hand, looking at the screen where footage showed the chaotic intersection, cars weaving dangerously. And something cold settled in his stomach, a premonition he could not name but felt nonetheless. Eleanor Hastings arrived at Metropolitan Hospital on Thursday morning in a chauffeur-driven Mercedes, her silver hair styled in a perfect chignon, her designer suit worth more than Marcus earned in 3 months, her expression carved from the same cold marble that graced the hospital's donor wall, bearing her late husband's name. She swept through the main entrance with the hospital administrator, Gerald Patterson, scurrying beside her like an anxious sparrow, his cheap suit wrinkled, his forehead gleaming with nervous perspiration, his entire focus on pleasing the woman whose donations kept the hospital financially afloat, even as its patient care deteriorated. Marcus was mopping the main corridor when she passed, his cart positioned carefully against the wall to avoid blocking traffic. But Eleanor walked by without the slightest acknowledgement of his existence, her eyes moving over him as though he were part of the architecture, something built into the structure rather than a living human being working to maintain it. Her son Richard joined them near the elevator, his posture straightening in her presence, seeking approval he never seemed to fully receive, and together they discussed budget cuts and efficiency metrics while standing 3 feet from where Marcus cleaned, speaking freely because they assumed his ears were as irrelevant as his presence. Sarah passed with a medication cart, and Eleanor stopped her with an imperious gesture. "Nurse, why are patient wait times in emergency increasing?" Sarah hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "We're understaffed, Mrs. Hastings. We lost 2 nurses last month and haven't replaced them. Everyone's working double shifts, and we're doing our best. But people are exhausted." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "Excuses don't improve metrics." Sarah glanced at Marcus, then back at Eleanor. "Neither does ignoring the people who keep this hospital running, all of them, at every level." The subtle emphasis was not lost on Eleanor, whose expression hardened with disapproval. "Your opinion on hospital operations has been noted, Nurse Chen." Patterson jumped in nervously, steering Eleanor away while babbling about cost-saving measures and revenue streams, his vocabulary stripped of any reference to actual human suffering, reducing medicine to spreadsheets and profit margins. The television in the waiting area played the midday news, and the anchor's voice drifted through the corridor as they departed. Transportation officials continue to express concern about the intersection of Highway 41 and Riverside Drive, where 17 accidents have occurred this year alone, making it the most dangerous crossing in the metropolitan area. City Council debates safety improvements as frustrated drivers continue to risk the poorly designed merge lanes. Marcus paused, mop in hand, looking at the screen where footage showed the chaotic intersection, cars weaving dangerously, and something cold settled in his stomach. A premonition he could not name but felt nonetheless. Marcus spent his lunch break in the small hospital garden behind the east wing. A forgotten patch of green where cracked benches sat beneath an aging oak tree, where birds sang oblivious to the suffering contained within the building's walls, where he could breathe air untainted by disinfectant and despair. He sat alone as always, his brown paper bag containing a simple sandwich he barely tasted. His mind already elsewhere, his hands reaching into his worn canvas messenger bag to retrieve the item he carried everywhere but showed to no one. The medical journal was at least 15 years old, its spine cracked from repeated opening, its pages dog-eared and marked with faded highlighter, its cover bearing the title Advanced Techniques in Trauma Surgery. Beneath layers of protective tape Marcus had applied to preserve it. His fingers traced the surgical diagrams with reverence and longing. Following the illustrations of vascular repairs and organ reconstructions, his lips moving silently as he read procedures he had once performed, with his eyes closed. Techniques that lived in his muscle memory, even though he had forbidden himself from using them. For just a moment, the garden disappeared, replaced by a memory so vivid it felt like time travel. A younger Marcus in blue surgical scrubs, standing in an operating room flooded with light, his hands steady and sure as they moved with balletic precision, his voice calm and commanding as he guided his team through a complex procedure, saving a life everyone else had declared unsavable, feeling the pure rightness of his purpose, the certainty that he had been born to heal. Sarah's voice pulled him back to the present. "Heavy reading for lunch," she said gently, sitting beside him without asking permission, her presence welcome rather than intrusive. He closed the journal quickly but not defensively, simply private. "Old habits," he said quietly. She unwrapped her own sandwich, and they sat in comfortable silence for a moment before she spoke again. "I became a nurse because I wanted to help people, to make a difference. You know, even when it's exhausting, even when doctors like Hastings treat us like we're invisible. I remember why I started." She turned to look at him, her eyes curious but kind. "Why did you become a janitor, Marcus? You seem like someone who could have done anything." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and when he answered, his voice carried depths she could not fathom. "Sometimes we choose what we can handle, not what we're capable of." Before she could ask what he meant, before the moment could deepen into true revelation, a commotion erupted from the emergency entrance. Sirens wailing, voices shouting, the characteristic chaos that signaled incoming trauma. And they both stood immediately. Sarah already moving toward the building, Marcus following more slowly, his journal clutched against his chest like a talisman from a life he no longer lived. The first ambulance arrived at 3:47 in the afternoon, its sirens screaming urgent warnings that sent emergency staff running to the bay doors. But before they could even unload that patient, 2 more ambulances appeared, then 3 more, then 4 more in a cascade of flashing lights and wailing desperation that transformed the emergency room from controlled chaos into something approaching pandemonium. The dispatcher's voice crackled over the radio with words that made seasoned nurses go pale. Multi-vehicle collision at Highway 41 and Riverside Drive. Semi-truck lost control. Estimate 20 to 30 casualties. Critical injuries. More ambulances incoming. Dr. Hastings emerged from his office, his usual arrogance replaced by genuine stress as he surveyed the flood of broken bodies being wheeled through the doors, blood-soaked gurneys rolling past faster than staff could process them, and his voice rose sharp and commanding as he barked orders at residents and nurses who were already moving at maximum capacity. Get me CT scans on the head injuries, type and cross-match everyone. Call in off-duty surgeons immediately. Move, move, move. Marcus stood in the hallway just beyond the emergency room entrance, his mop forgotten against the wall, his body frozen as he watched the catastrophe unfold, and something in his expression shifted like tectonic plates rearranging beneath the surface, his eyes tracking each patient with an intensity that had been absent for 7 years. A teenage girl with a crushed pelvis, a middle-aged man with chest trauma and labored breathing, an elderly woman unconscious and seizing, a young father whose abdomen was distended with internal bleeding, each case registering in Marcus's mind with automatic diagnostic precision he could not suppress. The body count rose. Not deaths yet, but critical patients whose survival depended on immediate intervention, and there were simply not enough hands, not enough doctors, not enough operating rooms to save them all. Dr. Brooks knelt beside a patient whose breathing had become agonal, her hands shaking as she attempted to intubate, missing once, twice, panic, overtaking technique as the patient's oxygen levels plummeted. Someone help me, I can't get the tube in, his airway is too damaged. Marcus moved closer without conscious decision, his feet carrying him toward the emergency room entrance, and his hands began to shake, but this tremor was different from the fearful trembling he had lived with for years. This was recognition, muscle memory, awakening like a sleeping giant stirring to life, his body remembering what his mind had tried desperately to forget. And he gripped the doorframe to steady himself while his heart hammered against his ribs with terrible understanding that everything was about to change. The chaos escalated beyond control, patients lining the hallways on gurneys because there was no more room in the emergency bay, nurses running between them trying to triage impossible choices about who needed help first, who could wait, who might not make it regardless of what they did. Dr. Hastings stood at the nurse's station with his phone pressed against his ear, his voice rising with each failed call. What do you mean you're in surgery? I need backup now. Find me anyone who can operate. He slammed the phone down and grabbed another line, dialing frantically while his eyes tracked the monitoring screens, showing vital signs crashing across multiple patients. The terrible mathematics of the crisis became clear as he shouted at Patterson. I have 3 patients who need immediate surgery, or they die within the hour. 3, and I only have 2 operating rooms staffed and 2 surgeons, including myself. Someone is going to die because we don't have enough people. A young mother, maybe 30 years old, began coding near the entrance, her monitor screaming its flatline alarm. And her 5-year-old son stood frozen against the wall, watching his mother die, his eyes wide with terror no child should ever experience, his small voice crying, "Mommy! Mommy!" While nurses rushed to begin CPR, their movements mechanical because they had no time for comfort when so many needed saving. Marcus moved closer, now standing just inside the emergency room proper, his eyes locked on the young mother. Seeing his own daughter's face superimposed over hers, and his chest constricted with pain that was both memory and present reality, his past calling to him with voices of all the people he had saved, all the lives he had touched, all the purpose he had abandoned. But fear held him paralyzed, the weight of his failure crushing down on him, the memory of his daughter's final breath on an operating table he should never have approached, the knowledge that his hands had once killed instead of healed. Dr. Brooks returned to the patient she had failed to intubate, attempting a surgical airway with hands that trembled violently, and she made an incision too deep, too lateral, blood spurting as she severed something she should not have touched. And the patient's oxygen levels dropped into the 20s, death approaching with mechanical certainty. No, 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 Brooks whispered, frozen in her mistake, and Hastings was too far away, occupied with another critical case, and no one else had the skill to fix what she had broken. Marcus could not stay silent anymore, could not watch another preventable death, could not let his fear matter more than the life bleeding away in front of him, and his voice emerged quiet but absolutely clear, cutting through the chaos with unexpected authority. You need to apply direct pressure 2 centimeters medial to your incision and create a new access point below the cricoid cartilage. Every head turned toward Marcus, nurses freezing mid-movement, residents staring with open mouths. The emergency room suspended in a moment of shocked disbelief that the invisible janitor had spoken, that he had dared to offer medical instruction as though he possessed knowledge instead of just a mop. Dr. Hastings spun around, his face flushing red with fury and indignation. "Get back to your mop, old man. This is a medical emergency, not a custodial seminar. You have no business here." But Marcus stepped closer, his voice remaining calm despite his racing heart, his words precise and clinical. "The incision is too lateral and too deep. She's compromised the carotid sheath. If you don't control the bleeding and establish an airway through a cricothyrotomy, within 90 seconds, this patient will suffer irreversible brain damage." Dr. Brooks stared at him, her hands still pressed against the spurting blood, her desperation overriding her shock. What do I? Marcus moved beside her, not touching the patient but guiding with his words, his instructions clear and detailed, explaining the exact angle of approach, the depth of incision, the landmarks she needed to identify, speaking with the authority of someone who had performed this procedure hundreds of times. Brooks followed his guidance with shaking hands, making the new incision exactly where he indicated. And suddenly the tube slid into place, the patient's chest rising as oxygen finally reached starving lungs, and the monitor's alarm silencing as saturation levels began climbing back toward safety. The patient stabilized, temporarily saved, and Brooks looked at Marcus with wonder and confusion warring across her features. Hastings strode over, his arrogance cracking under the weight of what he had just witnessed. "How in God's name does a janitor know emergency airway management? Who are you?" Marcus's face showed his internal war, years of hiding colliding with the undeniable reality that people were dying, that his fear mattered less than their lives, and that perhaps this moment had been inevitable from the second he took this job 7 years ago. Before he could answer, another monitor began its death scream, a patient crashing near the entrance, nurses shouting for help that was not coming fast enough. And Marcus made his decision in that crystallized moment when time slowed and clarity emerged from chaos. His voice was quiet but steady, carrying the weight of truth too long suppressed. "I can help. I'm a surgeon." Hastings laughed, the sound harsh and disbelieving, his contempt flooding back with renewed force. "A surgeon? You're a janitor! You mop floors, you clean toilets! Have you lost your mind, or is this some pathetic fantasy?" He turned to the security guard standing near the entrance. "Remove this man from the emergency room immediately. He's interfering with medical personnel during a crisis." But Sarah stepped between them, her exhaustion replaced by fierce determination, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Dr. Hastings, people are dying right now, this second, and he just saved that patient when Dr. Brooks couldn't. So maybe you should listen instead of performing for an audience." Patterson appeared from the administrative office, his face pale with terror at the unfolding scene. "We cannot allow unlicensed personnel to practice medicine. The liability alone would destroy this hospital. We'll be sued into oblivion." Marcus reached into his wallet with steady hands, pulling out a laminated card he had carried for 7 years without ever showing anyone. And he held it up for them to see. "I'm board certified in trauma surgery and emergency medicine. My license is current and valid. I was a trauma surgeon for 22 years before I took this position." His voice carried quiet dignity that commanded attention despite his janitor's uniform. "My name is Marcus Webb, and I can save these patients if you let me." Hastings snatched the license, examining it with narrowed eyes, looking for fraud, for forgery, or for any reason to dismiss this impossible claim. But the credentials were legitimate, the certification board seals authentic, and confusion replaced his mockery. "This doesn't make sense. Why would a surgeon work as a janitor? This has to be. Another patient began crashing, monitors screaming across the emergency room, and Marcus turned toward the sound with automatic response. But Eleanor Hastings's voice froze everyone in place. She had emerged from the administrative hallway, drawn by the commotion, and she stood staring at Marcus as though she had seen a ghost rise from the grave. "Marcus Webb?" Her voice was barely a whisper, shock stripping away her usual imperious tone. "Marcus Webb? The Marcus Webb?" The emergency room went silent except for the screaming monitors and labored breathing of dying patients. Everyone turning to look at Eleanor, whose face had gone white, whose hand pressed against her chest as though her heart had stopped. "You operated on my husband. You saved his life when 5 other surgeons said he was beyond hope. You were chief of surgery at Johns Hopkins. You pioneered half the trauma techniques still used today. She stopped, understanding flooding her features. "What are you doing here as a janitor?" Eleanor moved closer, her voice gaining strength as she addressed the gathered staff, her words transforming the janitor before them into someone entirely different. Marcus Webb was not just a trauma surgeon, he was the trauma surgeon. The one other hospitals called when cases were impossible, when patients were declared unsavable, when conventional medicine had no answers left to offer. Her eyes never left Marcus's face. "He operated on my husband 8 years ago after a massive car accident, performed an experimental vascular reconstruction that no one else would even attempt, and gave us 3 more precious years together before cancer took him. He was chief of surgery at Johns Hopkins, published 73 papers, pioneered techniques in damage control surgery that are taught in every medical school in this country, trained a generation of surgeons who went on to save thousands of lives." Hastings stood speechless, his arrogance shattered, staring at Marcus as though seeing him for the first time, and Dr. Brooks's expression shifted from confusion to awe, while nurses whispered to each other in disbelief. The question hung in the air, unspoken but screaming from every face. Why is this legend working as a janitor? Marcus's jaw tightened, and when he spoke, his voice carried a pain so deep it silenced even the chaos around them. "I lost someone on my table. I couldn't do it anymore." The words were simple, but they cost him everything to say. The memory crashed over him like a wave, his daughter's face pale on the operating table, her rare congenital condition that only he had the skill to repair, his hands moving with desperate precision while colleagues begged him to let someone else operate. His refusal because no one loved her more. No one would fight harder. And then her heart stopping, her eyes closing. His hands unable to save the one person who mattered most. His breakdown complete and devastating. 7 years of running from the guilt that consumed him. His hands began shaking violently at the memory, trembling with the weight of failure, and tears pressed against his eyes, though he refused to let them fall. Another patient began coding across the emergency room. A young woman whose monitor flatlined, whose life was slipping away while they stood frozen in this moment of revelation. And Sarah moved to stand beside Marcus, her hand gently touching his trembling arm. "Dr. Webb," she said softly, using his title for the first time, acknowledging who he truly was. "You can save them now, please." Marcus gave a single, quiet nod, the gesture small but carrying the weight of 7 years of exile, ending in a single moment of choice, and Hastings looked at him for a long second before desperation overrode pride, and he spoke through gritted teeth. "Operating room 2. The young father with abdominal trauma. If you can't save him, I'll have your license permanently revoked for malpractice." Marcus walked toward the surgical wing, his feet carrying him down hallways he had avoided for years, through doors that represented everything he had lost and everything he had been. And Sarah walked beside him while nurses scrambled to prepare the operating room. He stood at the scrub sink, the water running hot over his hands, and the motions returned as though he had never stopped. The precise number of strokes, the angle of his wrists, the surgical soap creating foam that washed away not just dirt, but years of pretending to be less than he was. His hands remembered, muscle memory taking over, movements so practiced they existed beyond conscious thought, and he felt something inside him shifting, breaking, reforming into a shape he had thought was lost forever. A nurse helped him into the surgical gown, tying it at the back, and as the fabric settled over his shoulders, Marcus transformed before their eyes, his posture straightening, his expression changing from haunted to focused, the janitor disappearing and the surgeon emerging like a phoenix from ashes that had burned for far too long. The surgical team assembled around the table watched him with uncertainty and fear. Unsure whether they were witnessing salvation or disaster, whether this legend would save them or whether his years away had stripped him of the skills that once defined him. The patient lay unconscious on the table, a young father of two whose abdomen was swollen with internal bleeding, whose blood pressure was dropping despite maximum intervention, whose life measured in minutes rather than hours. Marcus stood beside the table, looking down at the man who trusted strangers to save him, who had no idea his life depended on a janitor who had not held a scalpel in 7 years. And Marcus took a deep breath, closed his eyes for just a moment, felt his daughter's presence like a gentle hand on his shoulder, and opened his eyes with clarity he had forgotten existed. He reached for the instrument tray, his hand steady and sure, and his voice emerged strong and commanding, transformed completely from the quiet janitor who had mopped these floors. Scalpel. The scalpel touched skin, and Marcus's first incision was perfect, a single, smooth line that opened the abdomen with precision that came from thousands of hours of practice, from muscle memory etched so deeply into his being that 7 years of absence meant nothing, and the years fell away like shed clothing, revealing the surgeon who had always existed beneath the janitor's disguise. His hands moved with balletic grace, calling for instruments before the surgical nurse could anticipate his needs. Retractor, suction, lap pad. His voice rhythmic and assured, orchestrating the surgery like a conductor leading a symphony he had written himself. Dr. Brooks stood across the table assisting, her eyes wide with awe as she watched him work with speed and skill that seemed almost superhuman. His movements economical and purposeful, wasting not a single second while the patient's life hung in the balance. "There," Marcus said, pointing to an area the initial imaging had missed. "Splenic laceration, grade 3, and the hepatic artery is compromised. See the discoloration? We have active bleeding into the retroperitoneum that wasn't identified in triage." He worked deeper, exposing the torn artery that was flooding the abdomen with blood, and this was the complex repair that would determine whether this father went home to his children or died on this table. The kind of procedure that separated competent surgeons from masters of the craft. Suddenly, the bleeding intensified, blood filling the surgical field faster than suction could clear it, and Brooks tensed, her breath catching, but Marcus remained absolutely calm. His voice steady. "Expected complication. The artery wall is friable from the trauma. Standard repair won't hold." His hands moved with impossible speed, his mind calculating options faster than computers processed data, and he began a technique he had pioneered 15 years ago at Johns Hopkins, a modified running suture combined with a synthetic patch that distributed tension across damaged tissue instead of relying on weakened vessel walls to hold. Brooks watched in amazement as his hands performed microsurgery at speeds that seemed to violate the laws of physics, each stitch perfect, each movement deliberate, and gradually the bleeding slowed, then stopped, then the artery held strong and intact. Perfusion restored, blood pressure stabilizing. The anesthesiologist called out, relief flooding his voice. Marcus completed the repair, checked every organ systematically for injuries others might have missed, found 2 more small lacerations and repaired them efficiently, then closed the abdomen with the same meticulous care he had shown throughout. The patient's vital signs strengthened, the monitor showing rhythms that promised survival rather than death. And Marcus stepped back from the table, his first surgery in 7 years complete, his first life saved since the one he had failed to save, and something broken inside him began, just barely, to heal. Marcus stripped off his gloves and gown, but before he could even reach the scrub sink, a nurse appeared in the doorway, her face urgent. "Dr. Webb, we need you immediately. The young mother who coded earlier, she's deteriorating fast, needs emergency surgery now." No rest, no moment to process what he had just accomplished, just another life depending on him, another chance to prove his hands could still heal instead of destroy. He moved toward the second operating room, passing through the hallway where Sarah sat with a small boy, maybe 5 years old. His face streaked with tears, his small hands clutching a stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. Marcus stopped, looking at the child, and suddenly he was not in Metropolitan Hospital but in another place, another time. His own daughter at 6 years old, holding her favorite doll, trusting him completely to make everything better, believing with absolute faith that Daddy could fix anything. The memory threatened to paralyze him, fear flooding back with crushing force. But Sarah caught his eye and gave him a small nod, her expression saying everything words could not, reminding him that this was his chance for redemption, his opportunity to save the mother this child needed. He entered the second operating room with renewed determination, scrubbing in while nurses briefed him on the extent of injuries. Multiple organ damage, crushed pelvis, internal bleeding from sources they had not yet identified, a case so complex it pushed the boundaries of what surgery could accomplish. Dr. Hastings stood in the observation gallery above, his arms crossed, watching with an expression that mixed humility with fascination, his arrogance stripped away by witnessing mastery that exceeded his own abilities. Marcus began operating, but this time he spoke as he worked, explaining his reasoning to the residents who had gathered to watch. Teaching the way he had taught for decades, making his brilliance accessible instead of mysterious. See how the liver edge is darker here? That indicates deeper trauma than the surface laceration suggests. We need to mobilize the entire lobe to assess properly. His hands moved while his voice educated, demonstrating techniques with patient clarity, even while working at speeds that left observers breathless. He repaired the spleen, reconstructed damaged intestine, stopped bleeding from the renal artery. His movements flowing from one crisis to the next, with seamless expertise. Then, suddenly, the monitor flatlined, the heart stopping without warning, and chaos erupted around the table, but Marcus was already moving, and his hands on the patient's chest, performing manual cardiac massage with perfect rhythm and devastating strength. "Not today," he said quietly, his voice fierce with determination, his hands refusing to stop, refusing to accept defeat. "Not this, mother." 2 minutes of cardiac massage, then 3, then 4. And the heart refused to restart. The electrical activity on the monitor showing only chaotic patterns that promised death, and the anesthesiologist spoke the words everyone feared. "Dr. Webb, we're losing her." Maybe we should call it. Marcus did not stop, his compressions maintaining perfect rhythm, and his voice cut through the doubt. "Prepare an intracardiac injection of epinephrine. We're going to do direct cardiac stimulation. It's an older technique, but it works when standard protocols fail." The team hesitated, glancing at each other. The method he described rarely used anymore, considered too dangerous, too unpredictable, but Marcus persisted, his authority absolute. Now, they scrambled to comply, and Marcus made a small incision between the ribs. His hands steady as he inserted the needle directly into the heart muscle, injecting the medication where it could work immediately rather than traveling through collapsed circulation, a technique that required perfect anatomical knowledge and hands that never wavered. For 10 seconds nothing happened, the monitor still flatlined, death still winning, and then suddenly a blip, a beat, another, and the heart began contracting again, rhythm establishing itself, life returning to a body that had been seconds from permanent departure. Marcus completed the surgery with meticulous care, closing each layer properly despite his exhaustion, ensuring she would heal completely. That this mother would watch her son grow up. He emerged from the operating room 6 hours after entering it, his surgical gown soaked with sweat, his face showing the strain of concentration that had not broken for a single moment, and the small boy was still there in the hallway, Sarah holding his hand. The child saw Marcus and somehow understood, breaking free to run toward him, his small arms wrapping around Marcus's legs in a fierce hug. "You saved my mommy. The nurse told me you saved my mommy." Marcus knelt down, pulling the child into a proper embrace, and something inside him shattered completely, tears streaming down his face as 7 years of grief poured out. his shoulders shaking while the boy held him with complete trust. Sarah was there immediately, her hand on Marcus's shoulder, supporting him through the breakdown he had needed for so long, letting him feel everything he had suppressed. But even in his tears, even in his exhaustion, Marcus heard the voices beyond them, nurses calling out, another patient in distress, and he stood slowly, wiping his face. "How many more?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. And without waiting for Sarah's answer, he turned toward the scrub sink again, already moving, already preparing to save the next life. Marcus operated for 12 hours straight, moving from one operating room to another without pause, his hands performing miracles on body after body, saving the teenage girl with the crushed pelvis, reconstructing the chest wall of the middle-aged man with thoracic trauma, repairing the compound fractures of an elderly woman whose bones had shattered like glass. Each surgery a masterclass in trauma care, each patient a life reclaimed from death's grasp. Other surgeons gathered in the observation galleries, watching with reverence usually reserved for witnessing history being made, taking notes, recording techniques, learning from a master who taught even while fighting exhaustion. Dr. Brooks worked alongside him now, her earlier panic transformed into growing confidence as Marcus guided her through complex procedures, his teaching patient and precise. "You have excellent hands, Dr. Brooks. Trust them, feel the tissue, let your instincts guide you. Surgery is as much art as science." She absorbed everything, her skills expanding with each passing hour under his mentorship. Becoming the surgeon she had always possessed the potential to be. Word spread through Metropolitan Hospital like wildfire, staff members abandoning their posts to witness the impossible, nurses whispering to each other that the janitor they had ignored was saving everyone, that Marcus Webb was not just competent but legendary, that they were watching something they would tell their grandchildren about. News crews arrived outside the hospital, cameras filming the ambulances still arriving, and reporters speaking urgently into microphones about the tragedy and the mysterious surgeon who had appeared from nowhere to save the day. Eleanor Hastings stood in the administrative hallway watching monitors that showed each operating room. Her imperious mask cracked completely, tears streaming down her face as she witnessed redemption unfolding in real time, understanding that the broken man who had mopped her floors was piecing himself back together, one saved life at a time. Even Hastings himself had transformed, now assisting Marcus in surgery. His ego dissolved by the undeniable reality of his own limitations compared to Marcus's brilliance. Handing instruments with quiet humility, learning instead of commanding. The last critical patient arrived near midnight, an elderly man in his 70s whose injuries were catastrophic. Multiple organ failure, massive trauma that made the previous cases look simple by comparison, and when Marcus looked at his face, he saw his own father who had passed away 2 years before his daughter, saw the gentle man who had encouraged him to become a doctor, who had believed in him unconditionally. This case seemed impossible. The kind surgeons shake their heads at and prepare families for the worst. But Marcus looked at those monitors, showing a failing body, and felt determination override exhaustion, felt purpose burning brighter than fatigue. The final surgery became a symphony of everything Marcus had learned across 3 decades of medicine. His hands employing techniques from different eras of his career, combining classical approaches with modern innovations, adapting and improvising, inventing solutions in real time because textbooks had never covered trauma this extensive. He repaired the damaged heart valve using a modification of a procedure he had published 15 years ago. Reconstructed the shattered liver with techniques he was creating as he worked, his mind processing anatomical puzzles faster than his exhausted team could follow. Hours passed. 2, then 3, then 4. The team sagging with fatigue, but inspired by his unwavering dedication. Drawing strength from his refusal to surrender, watching a man who had every reason to quit, push beyond human limitations because a life depended on him. The critical moment came at 3 in the morning, the patient's blood pressure dropping despite everything they had done, the heart weakening, vital signs spiraling downward toward flatline, and the anesthesiologist spoke softly. "Dr. Webb, I don't think he's going to make it. We've done everything possible. Marcus stood with his hands inside the man's chest, feeling the failing heart beneath his fingers, and he closed his eyes. Exhaustion threatening to overwhelm him, doubt creeping in, and suddenly he heard his daughter's voice, clear as though she stood beside him. It was a memory from the night before her surgery, her small hand in his, her eyes full of trust. "You're the best doctor in the whole world, Daddy. You can fix anything. I know you can. You never give up on people who need you." The memory crashed over him with devastating clarity, her faith in him absolute and unshakable, her belief that he was capable of miracles, and he opened his eyes with renewed determination burning through his fatigue like fire through paper. His hands moved with precision born of desperation and love, adjusting his technique, redistributing the cardiac repair, finding the weakness in his approach and correcting it, refusing to accept that impossible meant inevitable. Gradually, the heart strengthened, the blood pressure stabilized. The monitor showed rhythms that promised survival. And at 4:17 in the morning, Marcus completed the final suture, stepped back from the table, and spoke words that felt like prayer. He's going to live. All critical patients saved. Every single one. 0 deaths, despite odds that should have resulted in multiple casualties. And Marcus finally allowed himself to rest, his legs nearly buckling as exhaustion claimed him. But before he fell, Sarah was there with a chair, and he sat heavily, his head in his hands, his body shaking with relief and exhaustion and emotions too complex to name. Marcus sat alone in the locker room, still wearing his surgical scrubs, the fabric dark with sweat and marked with blood that belonged to people who were alive because of him, and his hands shook violently now that adrenaline was fading, the tremor returning with vengeance, as though his body was reminding him that miracles came with costs. Sarah entered quietly, not asking permission, just sitting beside him on the wooden bench in comfortable silence that acknowledged his need to not be alone, even if words felt impossible. Minutes passed before Marcus spoke, his voice barely above a whisper, the story pouring out of him like poison, finally being drawn from a wound that had festered for 7 years. Her name was Lily. She was 9 years old. She had a rare congenital heart condition that was slowly killing her, and I was the only surgeon in the country with the expertise to repair it. Knuckles white. Every other surgeon told me I shouldn't operate on my own daughter, that I was too close, that my judgment would be compromised, but I couldn't let someone else do it when I knew I was better, when I knew I had the best chance of saving her. Tears streamed down his face. 7 years of suppressed grief finally released. She died on my table. My hands couldn't save her. The one person who mattered most in the world, and I failed her. I held her heart in my hands and felt it stop beating, and I couldn't bring her back. His voice broke completely. I blamed myself. The medical board suspended my license for 6 months for performing surgery on family. And when I got it back, I couldn't face an operating room, couldn't hold a scalpel without seeing her face, so I found this janitor position because I needed to be near medicine but couldn't practice it, needed to be around healing, even though I felt like I only brought death. Sarah's hand found his, squeezing gently, her voice thick with compassion. You honored her memory today, Dr. Webb. You saved everyone, every single person. You gave children back their parents and parents back their children. She would be so proud of you. Marcus wept openly, his shoulders shaking, years of grief pouring out in great heaving sobs, and Sarah simply held his hand while he broke apart. The door opened, and Eleanor Hastings entered, her own eyes red with tears. Her voice humble. I'm sorry, Dr. Webb. I'm so sorry I didn't recognize you. That I walked past you like you were invisible. That I never saw the extraordinary person right in front of me. Hospital Administrator Patterson arrived at the locker room door, his nervous energy barely contained, speaking quickly about news crews requesting interviews, about the story going viral on social media, about how Metropolitan Hospital was being praised as the site of a miracle. Dr. Webb, the families want to thank you. The media wants to speak with you. This is incredible publicity for the hospital. Marcus shook his head, exhaustion and emotion overwhelming him. I don't want publicity. I just want to go home. But Sarah touched his arm gently, her voice soft but persuasive. They need to thank you, Marcus. They need to see you. to know who saved their families. Please, just for a few minutes." He followed her reluctantly to the hospital lobby, still wearing his blood-stained scrubs, looking more like a refugee from battle than a triumphant hero. And the moment families saw him, they erupted in spontaneous applause that echoed through the vast space, dozens of people standing and clapping and crying with gratitude that transcended words. Children ran to him, their small arms wrapping around his legs, and parents approached with tears streaming down their faces, shaking his hands, embracing him, thanking him with voices choked by emotion. The young mother whose heart he had restarted appeared with her son, both of them walking toward Marcus. And she collapsed into his arms, sobbing, "You gave me back my life. You gave my boy his mother. I don't know how to thank you. I don't have words big enough." Her son held up his stuffed rabbit. "This is for you, Mr. Doctor, because you're a hero." Dr. Hastings stepped forward, his expression humble in a way no one had ever witnessed, his voice carrying through the lobby. "I owe Dr. Webb an apology. I treated him with contempt and arrogance. I mocked him and dismissed him. And he responded by saving every single life that came through our doors tonight with skill I can only aspire to possess." He extended his hand. "Thank you, Dr. Webb, and I would like to offer you the position of Chief of Surgery at Metropolitan Hospital, if you'll accept it." Marcus looked down at his janitor uniform beneath the bloody scrubs, uncertainty crossing his face, 7 years of hiding warring with the possibility of reclaiming his identity. And Eleanor Hastings stepped forward with the commanding presence of someone accustomed to reshaping reality through sheer force of will. "I have a better proposal, Dr. Webb, one that honors what you've given us tonight and what this hospital truly needs." Eleanor's voice carried authority softened by genuine respect. "I propose we reinstate you fully as a senior attending surgeon, create the Marcus Webb Trauma Surgery Program with you as its director, and provide funding for you to train the next generation of surgeons in the techniques you've pioneered." She gestured to the gathered crowd. "You can work at your own pace, heal while helping others heal, teach while you continue your own journey. We'll build this program around your needs and your vision." Hospital staff had gathered in the lobby, nurses and orderlies and technicians who had worked alongside Marcus for 7 years without truly seeing him, their faces showing respect that had been absent before, shame mixed with admiration, understanding that they had been blind to greatness standing right beside them. The doctors who had mocked him now looked at him with reverence, their earlier cruelty transformed into desperate hope that he might forgive them, might stay, and make them better than they were. Dr. Brooks stepped forward, her voice trembling with sincerity. "Please teach us, Dr. Webb. We need you. Tonight you showed me what surgery can be when it's practiced with skill and compassion and absolute dedication. Please don't leave." Marcus looked at all the faces surrounding him, seeing acceptance where there had been dismissal, seeing respect where there had been contempt. And he felt something shift in his chest, a weight he had carried for 7 years beginning to lighten. A memory surfaced unbidden, his daughter at 8 years old, watching him prepare for a difficult surgery, her voice filled with absolute certainty. "You were born to heal people, Daddy. It's who you are. It's what makes you special. You can't ever stop because the world needs you." He closed his eyes, feeling her presence like sunlight breaking through clouds, and when he opened them again, his decision was made. "I'll accept," he said quietly, then louder so everyone could hear. "But with one condition. This hospital changes starting now. We honor every patient as a human being. We treat every staff member with respect regardless of their position. We remember that janitors and nurses and technicians are just as essential to healing as surgeons, and that dignity belongs to everyone who walks through these doors." He looked directly at Hastings. "Can you agree to that?" Hastings nodded, his expression showing genuine transformation rather than empty promises. "Yes, Dr. Webb, I can, and I will. You have my word. Things will be different." 6 months later, Marcus Webb stood in a state-of-the-art operating theater. Wearing a pristine white coat with his name embroidered across the chest, teaching a group of eager residents the intricate details of vascular reconstruction. His voice patient and encouraging, his hands demonstrating techniques on a surgical simulator, while young doctors absorbed every word with reverence. The new wing of Metropolitan Hospital gleamed with modern equipment and bore a bronze plaque at its entrance reading Dr. Marcus Webb Center for Trauma Excellence, a facility dedicated to saving lives and training the surgeons who would carry his legacy forward into the future. Dr. Jennifer Brooks had become his most accomplished student. Her early arrogance transformed into confident humility, her skills growing exponentially under his mentorship until she performed surgeries that would have terrified her 6 months earlier, and Marcus watched her work with the pride of a teacher seeing potential fully realized. He still ate lunch in the hospital garden, but now he was often joined by his friends from housekeeping, the janitors and maintenance workers who had been his only companions during those 7 years of exile, and he never forgot where he had come from. Never let success distance him from the people who kept the hospital running through their invisible labor. Eleanor had established the Lily Webb Memorial Scholarship, funding medical school for underprivileged students who might never have had the opportunity otherwise, ensuring that talent and dedication mattered more than wealth and connections. Dr. Hastings had transformed genuinely. His arrogance replaced by collaborative humility. His interactions with staff marked by respect rather than contempt, proving that even the most hardened hearts could change when confronted with true greatness. Sarah had been promoted to head nurse of the trauma department. Her compassion and skill finally recognized and rewarded. Her friendship with Marcus deepening into something that felt like family, like healing for both their wounded souls. On Sunday mornings, Marcus visited the cemetery where his daughter rested beneath a maple tree, and he sat beside her grave, telling her about the lives he had saved, the students he had taught, the second chance he had been given to honor her memory through healing others. That Tuesday afternoon, walking through the main corridor, Marcus saw a young doctor dismissing a new janitor with an impatient wave, the same contemptuous gesture that had once been directed at him countless times. He approached immediately, his voice firm but kind. "Dr. Morrison, I'd like you to meet Carlos Rodriguez. He's been with us for 2 weeks, and I've noticed he does exceptional work." He extended his hand to the janitor, shaking it with genuine respect. "We're all part of healing here. Every single one of us, from the surgeons to the staff who keep our environment safe and clean, everyone matters. Everyone deserves dignity." The young doctor's face flushed with understanding, and he mumbled an apology, shaking Carlos's hand properly. Marcus smiled, seeing the hospital culture transforming one interaction at a time, watching kindness ripple outward like stones thrown into still water. He was finally at peace, living fully again, his hands steady, his purpose restored, his daughter's memory honored not through grief, but through the countless lives he touched with skill and compassion, and he knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he belonged, doing exactly what he was born to do. Marcus Webb's story reminds us of a truth we too often forget in our rush through busy days and crowded spaces, that every person we encounter carries hidden depths we cannot see, that the janitor mopping floors might once have been a legend, that the quiet person we dismiss without a second glance might possess gifts that could change our lives, if only we paused long enough to recognize their humanity. We judge people by their uniforms and their titles, by their positions in hierarchies we construct to make ourselves feel superior, and in doing so we blind ourselves to the extraordinary individuals standing right in front of us, waiting to be seen, hoping to be valued, deserving respect we too easily withhold. Marcus spent 7 years invisible, broken by grief, hiding from the calling that defined him. But when crisis demanded everything he had, he chose courage over fear, chose to risk his broken heart one more time, because saving lives mattered more than protecting himself from pain. His story teaches us that second chances are real, that redemption is possible, that we can rise from our lowest moments and become even greater than we were before, that our failures do not define us unless we allow them to, that healing comes not from hiding, but from facing our fears with open hearts and steady hands. So look around at the people you pass without seeing, the workers you ignore, the servants you take for granted, and remember that each of them has a story, that each of them matters, that treating everyone with dignity and respect costs nothing but changes everything. If this story moved you, if Marcus's journey inspired you to see people differently, to value kindness over hierarchy, to recognize that we are all human beings deserving of respect regardless of our positions or our pasts, then share it with someone who needs to hear it, like this video to help others find it, and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the best parts of being human, the capacity we all possess for greatness when we choose compassion over contempt, for healing when we choose love over fear.